Welcome in to the West of the Rest podcast, season 3, episode number 3. I am your co-host Blair Angulo, joined by my co-host Brandon Huffman. Huff, can you believe it's week 5 already of the college football season? I feel like we just got here.
Yeah, I mean, we're one more weekend of September football, and then we are into October and then to the month of November. But Blair, we got some major matchups this weekend that makes you feel like we are not in the early dog season of bad games. We're into some big time national games that have conference implications. So we are cooking.
It's my wife's birthday weekend. So,
Mm.
you get to that stage where you don't even just celebrate a birthday, you celebrate a weekend, you celebrate a week, you celebrate a birthday month, if you will. So the phone, I'll have to have my phone charger with me to be able to track as much of the action as possible. And Huff, actually, a few years ago, we were able to celebrate her birthday while we were sailgating. So we were up in Seattle for that big Washington versus Michigan State battle. If you remember, Michael Penix was still at UW that year.
Yeah.
So it kind of brings me back. And we are going to touch on the Huskies. That'll be one of the big topics of today's episode. We're also going to hit on some of these sights and sounds from what we saw on the high school football trail this past week. You were at a big matchup. I was at a big matchup. Also going to rehash where some of the UCLA decommitments are potentially headed, maybe some schools that are in the mix there. And we're also going to give our recruiting update of the week. But before we get to all of that, remember that we are brought to you by our sponsor, the Avery Strong Defeat DIPG Foundation. Huff, let's get going with the big topic of the week, especially out west, especially with recruits out west, and that is Washington hosting Ohio State in Seattle. It's going to be a massive matchup on the field, but off the field, it's going to give the Huskies a nice little platform to potentially catapult themselves a little bit further with some 2026 recruits as well as some 2027 recruits.
Yeah, you talked about a little bit ago, the quick game or the quick visit up to Washington that you made. It was kind of a flash of a visit, if you remember. But that was also the first big moment for Kalen DeBoer with Washington. And that victory kind of catapulted them over the next year and a half to a national championship berth. Well, they lost in that national championship game in 2023 to Michigan. Last year, Michigan came to Husky Stadium and lost to Washington. For the second straight year, the defending national champions come to Montlake to take on Washington, who has not lost at home since November of 2021. All right, so they've gone 3 seasons and 2 home games this year without losing a home game. But this is by far their toughest home game in that stretch. The number 1 team in the country. And Washington is making no bones about it. This is a big game for them. It's going to be on CBS. It's 12:30 local kickoff. But they've got elite recruits coming, not just from their backyard. They've got elite recruits coming from all over the country. They've got the number 1 player in the state for 2026, Derek Coleman-Brusa, already committed. They have the number 1 recruit in 2027 in the state, Tavita Nonu out of O'Day High School coming. They have the number 1 recruit in the state in 2028, Titan McNeil coming. He's the number 1 tight end in the country in that class. They've also got a number of other local targets that they got. In fact, the top 8 recruits in the state of Washington in 2027 will all be there. They also have the number 1 running back on the West Coast in 2027, Noah Roberts, who, by the way, prepped at the same high school that Damon Williams started at before going on to Washington. And then you throw in some of the California recruits they got coming in. They've got a pair coming from St. John Bosco, from Inglewood. This is a big moment for Jedd Fish, his recruiting staff, with Matt Doherty, Jalil Adoob, Marcus Griffin. This is a big moment for the Huskies. If they can get a win, that is going to resonate heavily with the 2026 class, obviously making them feel validated in their decision. It's going to pay huge ramifications with 2027 and with 2028. And one little caveat, we're going to talk about those UCLA decommits in a little bit. 2 of their decommits are both from Washington, David Schwarzel and Ramzak Fruian, who both decommitted on the day that Deshaun Foster was fired. They will both be at Husky Stadium on Saturday, as well as Fa'as Siale, who is committed to Michigan State, also at O'Day High School. So a big opportunity for the Huskies to maybe get back into it with a couple of local targets they lost.
I think a lot of fans wonder whether a win or whether a loss gets a program a certain amount of recruits, right? I think we see that on the message boards all the time over at 247sports.com is what will a win today mean for so-and-so? Hey, are we going to get this guy? Hey, what's going to happen if we beat this team by 20, by 30, by 40 with these guys in attendance? And I don't know if there's a direct correlation, especially from an immediate result standpoint. Like let's say UW does pull off the upset and takes down Ohio State this weekend. I'm not sure a lot of recruits are going to jump on board immediately, but I think what it does, it starts to plant a seed with recruits and with their families and the people that go up there and see the boats out on the water. And maybe they get on a boat and they're lucky enough to go sailgating for a little bit, or they walk around campus, or they are able to kind of experience the shake of that second deck there at Husky Stadium, which we all have kind of, been able to in a way experience and know that that's what it means to attend a football game there. And then when you're on the sideline as a recruit and you're able to watch the atmosphere, the colors, the sounds, just how electric a game like this can be, I think it does maybe set the table for what could come. And that's why I think it's important for 2027, also for 2028. And I think it elevates what Jedd Fisch is maybe trying to accomplish there at UW, right? It's going to, again, maybe allow him to continue to sell, continue to pitch the program, even in a close defeat. But if they look attractive, if they look fun, if Damon Williams goes off and does what we know that Damon Williams can do, if you hang tough against Ohio State, I don't know if anyone's going to be looking at that and saying, oh, too bad I'm not going to UW. I think it only allows you to sell that program. And Jedd Fisch, that's been a huge objective since he arrived from Tucson.
Well, and it validates it. It validates their efforts from a recruiting standpoint. That's not something that Kalen DeBoer really emphasized when he was at Washington. They would try to hit the portal hard. They maintained a lot of the players they had, but recruiting wasn't necessarily a strength. That's been the complete focus of Jedd Fisch. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind too, Blair. Last year when Ohio State won the national championship, 3 of their starters were from the state of Washington. Emeka Egbuka, JT Tuimoloau, and G. Scott. Now, is there any correlation there? Well, JT and G. Scott both played at Eastside Catholic. Titan McNeil, who's the number 1 player in the state in 2028, watched both of those guys win a national championship last year at Ohio State. But you've got Washington playing Ohio State. Ohio State is a helmet squad, okay? This is the kind of game that keeps those local kids saying, I don't need to go across the country to chase a national championship. I could stay here. Another thing to keep in mind, we mentioned Damon Williams. With Damon Williams, you've got a guy who is at Basha High School, wins a state championship at Basha High School. Well, the number 1 running back out west is Noah Roberts, who's at Basha High School. Where was Noah Roberts 3 weeks ago? He was in Columbus when Ohio State beat Texas. And again, this is their first game as the national champions. They play the number 1 team in the country, and they beat them at home. So you have a fired up Ohio State crowd that's excited to see what this new team can do, what Julian Sayin can do, and that helps. But now 3 weeks later, you've got Washington with the same opportunity. And by the way, their star quarterback played at the same high school that you played at. You were a freshman when that quarterback was a senior there. So this is the kind of game that doesn't just help with the local kids, but the perception nationally, which is crazy to talk about when you consider that 21 months ago, Washington was playing for a national championship against a team that has beaten Ohio State 4 years in a row. All right. But the perception could then be, I don't need to go to the Big Ten schools in the Midwest, or I don't need to go to the SEC schools. I can stay out west. Our guys are getting drafted out here. We're competing for national championships. So this is a big game for Washington, especially when you consider this isn't even their biggest home game. Yes, it is from a ranking standpoint, but at the end of the year, they've got their biggest rival to the south coming up to Husky Stadium. So this is the first of 2 major opportunities for Washington to impress these recruits. But given that game is Thanksgiving weekend, smack in the playoffs, it's going to be a little cooler, a little bit more rain, a little bit wetter. This is a major opportunity for the Huskies.
I think we watched that one from home. I think that's what recruits are saying, right? We're going to watch that one from home. We're going to be dry.
I certainly will be.
We're going to have our leftovers. Yeah. Huff, I do have some trivia for you. This has become a recurring segment. I think the people are clamoring for it. I want to ask you, you've got a big brain, so I know you probably know the answer to this. When was the last time that Washington had a better recruiting class than Ohio State? What year was that? Or what cycle was that?
I mean, I'm going to say you got to go back to, I'm going to say the 2012 season. And the only reason I'm going to say that is because that was the year that Steve Sarkisian landed Shaq Thompson. And he had just gotten Tosh Lupoi to come on board, while Ohio State had an interim coach that whole year in Luke Fickell, and Urban Meyer had just been hired. I'm going to go back to 2012. Am I right?
You were very close. So in 2012, in the 2012 cycle, they were separated by one spot, I want to say. The 2012 cycle, Ohio State had the 5th overall class in the country, according to the composite. Washington was a top 25 class, but they weren't as close. The correct answer is 2007. Now, can you name any players in either of those recruiting classes? 2007, Ohio State or Washington?
Let's see, Beanie Wells was 2006. Terrell Pryor was 2008. I'm going to say 2007. That was like J.B. Shugarts. There was Michael Brewster, who is now an analyst at Washington, if I remember right. He was in that 2007 class. Washington would have had friggin' frog. That was after. I lose you there? There we go.
There you go.
I'm going to say
frozen a little bit. You were trying to think of some recruits. So in 2007, and I think this is listed in alphabetic order, but Willie Griffin, Emeka Iweka, Brandon Johnson, Alvin Logan, players like Quentin Richardson from O'Day, Curtis Shaw, Austin Sylvester. And then Ohio State, I think the big name that I saw was Cameron Hayward in 2007.
Oh, yes. Was Michael Brewster in that class?
He was not. They had a really small class, only 15 signees in that class. Evan Blankenship, Daniel Herring, Jermaine Hines, Nate Oliver, Solomon Thomas was in there, Eugene Clifford. It's been a long time. It's been since the 2007 cycle since Ohio State has had a lower ranked recruiting class since Washington. Now, I'm not bringing that up to say that, things are going to change, because Ohio State's recruiting at an entirely different level. The stratospheres are not the same. But I think if you can get close to that top 15, top 10, and consistently recruit at that level while you are in the Big Ten, while you're replenishing with the portal in some key areas, I think it's very sustainable. I think it's very it's a real possibility for UW to consistently be competing in the Big Ten. I think we know that Ohio State's going to be recruiting at an elite level. They're going to be competing against the Georgias and the Texas and the Alabamas and schools like that for the number 1 class nationally. But I think UW has a chance, especially if they win Saturday, to start that snowball effect that we just talked about.
I think the big thing, too, is even if you don't win, it's to be competitive. What you don't want to have happen is what we saw happen in Salt Lake City last week, where all the excitement, all the anticipation for this game, the feeling that you're getting snubbed by not having game day there, and then you absolutely lay an egg to Texas Tech, who may not be the favorite to win the Big 12. Utah was gearing up for that game. That was going to be their biggest game in terms of visitors coming. They had that prime kickoff in the morning. They were ramped up for it, and then it fell apart. And now there's not a lot of buzz about Utah right now with those recruits that were the in-state kids. So what you don't want to have happen is if, Washington is a 10-point underdog. Do I think Ohio State is going to beat Washington? I mean, probably. Talking to some of my friends that are Washington fans, they anticipate that the Huskies will keep it close and lose, and that's what kind of all signs are pointing to. But if you can get a win, you get the perception. If it's even a close loss, you get the perception of this is a positive. You just don't want to lay an egg and get blown out at home by a team like Ohio State, because then it all becomes about how dominant Ohio State was in snapping that home winning streak. You want it to be, hey, Washington was right there. They kept it close until the end. And, I will say that Washington has not lost a game since I think Jimmy Lake had already been fired. Bob Gregory was the interim coach, and they lost to current Wake Forest head coach Jake Dickert in the Apple Cup. Since then, they had the memorable game against Oregon 2 years ago where game day was at. Oregon, I want to say, was in the top 5 at that time. They did beat Michigan last year, although Michigan had already come in on after a loss to Texas. And there was a little bit of a shine off that game because Washington had a loss themselves. But this is a big moment, and Washington has been tough to beat at home under Jedd Fisch and certainly under Kalen DeBoer. So, this may not be the 10-point game that the Vegas experts are saying. I have a feeling with the way DeMond Williams has been playing this season, this game's going to be a little bit closer, but you're going up against a very talented defense with the best player in college football in that secondary, and Caleb Downs. You want to keep it close because you want there to still be some lingering buzz.
And UW, especially if they're able to run the football, I think is going to be a really tough matchup because Jonah Coleman's been explosive this year. You mentioned DeMond Williams, his dual threat ability, and he's able to kind of take off and make plays with his legs, but then also beat you with his arm. Let's not forget that Ohio State is also in a way kind of breaking in, some new schemes defensively. So it's going to be in a way maybe a trap game. I don't know, but either way, we're going to have a lot of recruit reaction over at Dogman, the Washington site on the 24/7 Sports Network. So make sure you stay locked into the website throughout the weekend as recruits share their thoughts on what it was like to be in Seattle this weekend. Remember, this episode is brought to you by the Avery Huffman DIPG Foundation, created in honor of a brave little girl named Avery, who at just 6 years old was diagnosed with DIPG, the deadliest brain cancer in children. Avery's fight sparked a mission to fund desperately needed research, raise awareness, and support families facing the same devastating diagnosis. Join the fight for a cure at averystrongdipg.org. That's averystrongdipg.org, because every child deserves a chance at life. Huff, the second segment of today's show is let's call it sights and sounds from the high school football trail. You were at a big game. I was at a big game. Let's begin with you. You were at Brophy Prep versus Hamilton out in the desert. We joked. Our longtime listeners will remember that we used to say from Bay Bridges to Desert Ridges. Well, you are now in the desert, my friend. What was it like to be on the sidelines for that one?
Oh, I mean, it was electric. You got to see, one of the most dynamic players in the country in the 2028 class, in Roye Oliver III, just put on a show, 3 touchdown receptions and a 62-yard punt return. I'll tell you what, the Hamilton 2028 class is outstanding with 2 defensive players in Keaton Fields and Casey Allen. Both those guys are going to be national recruits. And then you have quarterback Jackson Scully as well. He threw a number of those touchdowns, to Roye Oliver, threw one to his younger brother, Ramon Oliver, who's in the 29 class. And then Derek LeBlanc is a 2027 recruit. Unfortunately for Hamilton, they are without the twins, Nico and Bojandro, who are both headed to Oklahoma, but Rex Waterman, the 2026 offensive lineman committed to Nebraska, was there, but a very talented group. And then for Brophy, Dalen Sharper was his first game back, the Stanford-bound receiver, looked a little bit, he's still working his way back. They're without Bastian Vandenbosch at linebacker, but Devin Fitzgerald put on a clinic, the number 3 player in the state of Arizona, the Navy All-American selection, who's headed to Notre Dame, had 14 receptions for 230 yards, 3 touchdowns. I believe his receptions tied a school record, which was held by former Olympian Devin Allen. The yards broke the school record, and the touchdowns, I think, was the 3rd most in Brophy history. So you go to games, you want to see the playmakers make plays, and each team's best playmaker put on a show, and that was the kind of game that you want to see when the heat is hot in Arizona, and it's still in the 90s at kickoff. You want to see the big-time playmakers make plays, and both Roye Oliver III and Devin Fitzgerald both have tremendous bloodlines. Roye Oliver's dad played at Arizona State. His grandfather ran track there. Obviously, Devin Fitzgerald's dad played a little bit of football in the state of Arizona during his career at one point, and both those guys showed that the apple hasn't fallen far from the tree.
You mentioned Oliver being a national recruit in 2028. He's already been stockpiling some offers. What are some schools to watch in his recruitment early on?
Yeah, Oregon just offered him last week, and I think that's obviously a big offer given that Oregon has done well in the state of Arizona when they really pursued players there. He's going to end up with a number of national offers as this film gets out from the early part of his sophomore season. Arizona State is the historical school for him. His grandfather ran track there. His father ran track there. Obviously, Kenny Dillingham wants to continue to keep the Valley activated, as he calls it, and win those local recruiting battles. And, we've talked about how wins don't always necessarily translate to immediate responses from recruits, but if you can show a continued track record, and Arizona has been that one state where their top players have routinely left the state, Kenny Dillingham is trying to give them reason to stay local, and you want to continue to have an opportunity with a legacy like Roye Oliver, and they've got 2 years to continue to show that offense, that program is trending in the right direction after the playoff season a year ago, and Roye Oliver may be one of their most significant in-state targets in years.
Yeah, explosive offense at ASU as well. Let's not forget that they put up points, they throw the ball out wide, and it's certainly a place where you can go and get your shine on, right? And maybe potentially continue to build a resume for the NFL draft. Huff, I was also in the desert, just a little bit north of you in Vegas for Mater Dei versus Bishop Gorman. Mater Dei coming off a loss at Corona Centennial, so you knew that they would show up a little bit angry. Bishop Gorman was ranked number 1 heading into the matchup, had still, in a way, national title aspirations. Mater Dei came out on top, but it was, again, a display of stars, just like your matchup. We had both 5 stars make plays in my game. Mark Bowman, 2 touchdown receptions, 5 catches, 105 yards, had the go-ahead score late in the second half. He was electric as well. I want to keep going back to that word because it's hard to utilize the tight end at the high school level unless you have a guy like Mark Bowman. And in crucial downs, it just looked like Ryan Hopkins, the Wisconsin-bound quarterback, just kept looking for number 19. And Mark Bowman, I think, is going to be able to be that player at USC when he arrives there. Immediately able to step in, is a really good route runner, knows how to play leverage, knows how to bite into zones and sit where he needs to. And he's got a really reliable set of hands. I think it goes back to his work in the 7-on-7 scene, always out on weekends. I think we'd see him for 6-7 weekends in a row across the country playing 7-on-7, which is, something interesting to see from a tight end. But I think he trains like a wide receiver. He's that reliable with his hands. And it paid off in a big way Friday in that victory against Gorman. And then with Jett Washington on the other side, Bishop Gorman, 5-star safety who's headed to Oregon. Well, he kind of caught on a bit, Huff. During the game, he realized, hey, it's 3rd down. They're going to look for number 19 who's streaking across the middle of the field. Well, Jett Washington jumps a route, intercepts the ball, returns it for a few yards. And with his frame at around 6'4", 6'5", 200, 215, it's hard to say kind of where he's at now, but he's looking big and hulking. And another player who I think there's no way you can keep him off the field at Oregon next fall because of just how quick he is to react, how he responds in the run game, his ability to track the football. He's a willing tackler, which is something we hardly ever say about a former basketball player who is in a way kind of a finesse guy on the hardwood. Jett Washington, Mark Bowman, they both brought the goods on Friday.
Hey, you know what? And going back to, I just want to use the new breaking news on. Going back to Roye Oliver, just moments ago, he was offered by the University of Oklahoma, which has the Heisman Trophy frontrunner right now in John Mateer. And Ben Arbuckle is obviously getting things cooking in Oklahoma. But speaking of cooking, Oregon and USC are both cooking on the field. Both are cooking in recruiting, and both have top 10 classes right now. And kind of what you expect it to be from USC and for Oregon. We've gotten used to it with Oregon. USC's been down a little bit, and so Bowman was one of those in-state guys that typically they've been losing. They had whoever they wanted from Mater Dei for years, and then in recent years, Mater Dei was not really kicking guys to USC. But then it all kind of flipped when Tom flipped from from Oregon to USC. Then they got Mark Bowman. So we're going to get to see some great Big Ten matchups between Oregon and USC in the future. And anytime you can go to Las Vegas to see a Big Ten matchup between Oregon and USC recruits, Blair, you just do it because we never literally did that ever until like 2 years ago.
Yeah. No, you got to do it. We did have to deal with some monsoon weather, which was odd to kind of think about, but the game was never really in question. It was fun. Our guy Greg Biggins was watching from home, and he was texting us in the group thread, kind of a live updates. And it was funny to kind of hear his thoughts because we were seeing some of the same things. But I was asking, hey, what did it look like on the replay? What did you see here? So that was kind of a cool little layer. Hopefully we can continue to do that with him, as he likes to kind of hang back and watch as many games on his laptop as possible at once. So can never blame GB for being as non-traditional as possible.
Exactly.
Let's go to our recruiting update of the week. You mentioned USC, and they had a big visitor list for their matchup against Michigan State, including the brothers from Hawaii, the Sateles, who made it to the Coliseum to check out the Trojans. It was a battle of Troy versus Sparta, Huff. I realized that a little bit too late. It was all set up for us there.
It was. I mean, it was like there's been movies made about that matchup historically.
Yeah, so you had the Toa and Samson. We got to see them, back in January, and then also in the summer, in July, out in Hawaii. The brothers that are really, really good. Some of the best players on the island at their respective positions. USC has the number one player in the state in Talanoa Ili already committed, and I think they're going to continue to dip into that pipeline.
Yeah, and it makes sense because there's great bloodlines there between Toa and Trison, their dad. Samson played at University of Hawaii, then went on to the NFL, played for the Miami Dolphins, and his sons are both outstanding. Toa is the number one player in the state in the 2027 class, a four-star All-American selection already to the Under Armour game. At linebacker, Trison is the top player in the state in 2028, a top 100 member, and it was their first game that they'd ever been to outside of Honolulu. They've been to numerous games at University of Hawaii, both at Aloha Stadium and at the Clarence Teaching Complex. Obviously they've got the family ties to University of Hawaii, but this is their first game that they'd ever been to on the mainland. And what an impressive showing for USC to, wow both of those guys who just raved about the time. Sean Nua is recruiting both of them. Rob Ryan is also recruiting them. So USC made a big impression for their first game outside of the 50th state for both those guys. And I have a feeling that USC is going to be very much a factor for both of them. The key is to get Toa, because the two of them have talked about being a package deal, but Toa gets the advantage that he's a year older. So where he goes, Trison will probably follow a year later, but the key is to really sell Toa. Now, Oregon is also heavily involved there. A lot of the national programs as well, Notre Dame and Ohio State come to mind. But USC is very much going to be a factor, and they could not have made a better impression on the first time than they did with both those two this weekend.
The thing that really sticks out to me about Toa Satele is just his versatility and maybe the ambiguity of what he's going to be. Like we know he's an incredible athlete for his size, and he's able to play some linebacker. But man, if you keep looking at his frame and you know that he's got 2 more years of high school remaining, when you're counting the rest of this season as well as next year, and then he's got the spring ball whenever he arrives on whatever campus he goes to. Then you think of, he's going to go to the summer program. Man, this player could be like an edge rusher. I don't know. And then that's the beauty of scouting a player like Toa Satele, because that the athleticism there, the upside's there. You just figure out what the fit is going to be down the line.
Well, and I think what we really like about him, too, is his competitiveness. When we've seen him in Hawaii, we've seen him at 2 days of the Warriors for Youth camps. He would come to the defensive line session and work out as an edge rusher. He'd come back the next night for the skills session and work out as a linebacker. And that's what's so intriguing about him, is that there is that versatility. Does he grow into a straight up edge hybrid guy? Does he play linebacker where he can show that versatility and drop into coverage? Whereas with Trison, make no mistake, he's an interior defensive lineman. Does he end up a nose? Is he a 3-tech? Is he just a true traditional tackle? There's some versatility there about what spot he'll end up playing inside. But, they both have shown the competitiveness. They were both at Punahou in 2024. Toa was there in 2023. Now they're at Mililani. And it's funny because you look at Mililani and they've got a couple of players like them. Trison, a guy that you and I both love, that we've been a big fan of for 2 years, a top 10 player in the state. Another one much like Toa, but Toa has that length. We saw him at the Under Armour camp, earned that invite to the All-American game as a sophomore. You would see him lined up with Talanoa Ely, who's the top player there, and a lot of physical similarities. And I think USC would love to bring the two of them in, but that positional versatility and at money positions, that edge rusher position is one of the most premium positions in all of college football. He's going to have plenty of suitors, given the fact that he could play really 4 or 5 spots.
You mentioned his competitiveness. For my own recruiting update of the weekend, I want to bring up Quentin Hale, who is one of the most competitive receivers in the country, regardless of class. He's the top-rated receiver out west in the 2027 group out of Los Angeles Cathedral. He was at Oklahoma. So not only have they already landed a 4-star wide receiver in this 2026 class in Daniel Odom from St. John Bosco, they were making a run at a few others. Now they're trying to make headway with Quentin Hale, who was out in Norman for the matchup against Auburn this past weekend. They already have a 2027 receiver commit in Damari DeZern, one of the fastest prospects in the country from Palisades Charter. He was originally from Bishop Alemany in Mission Hills, but now he's out closer to the coast, but he's headed to play for the Sooners in the 27 group. Quentin Hale was out there again, and he's a player who's considering a lot of his national options: Notre Dame, LSU, Georgia. I think he's going to be out at the Georgia-Alabama game as well. USC out west is a program that's making a big push, but watch out for the Sooners, because you brought it up earlier, Huff. That offense is super attractive right now to pass catchers. It's becoming one of those talking points of the season, where Oklahoma is under a resurgence, and it looks like that crowd looks like an Oklahoma crowd again. And when you mix in Mateer and Arbuckle and what they're doing with the offense, as well as with what Brent Venables is able to do with that defensive front, they look capable in the SEC. They beat Auburn. They've got a few other matchups here coming up on the horizon. And when you host players like Quentin Hale and you put on the performances that you do, it's only going to help your ability not only to recruit those players, but continue to maybe stretch your arms out to other parts of the country, like the West Coast, which obviously has a lot of players that Oklahoma is coveting right now.
Well, what's fascinating, too, is that the takeaway from that game was how John Mateer has really engineered a change in the Oklahoma offense, but it ignores the fact that Oklahoma sacked Jackson Arnold 10 times in his return game in Norman. So Brent Venables still doing what he does from a defensive standpoint, but now with the added bonus of the offense doing well, like you said, they've done really well with some of the West Coast recruits. They've also got Stacey Ford there, who had been the director of player personnel at UCLA, before that at Washington State. He is from Southern California, so they now have somebody in their personnel department who's got Southern California ties. They have DeMarco Murray, the running backs coach, who's from Las Vegas. Interestingly enough, Jaden Ott really hasn't done anything for them this year, but they have done a really good job in the West the last 2 classes. They're doing it again this year and in 2027. I think Quentin Hale is another guy that they can add him to the mix. That certainly enhances their offensive fireworks.
A hot topic last week, Huff, in the episode was maybe just the reaction or kind of the takeaways from UCLA firing Deshaun Foster after their Week 3 loss to New Mexico. A lot of those players that were committed to the Bruins have since reopened their process, and I wanted to kind of maybe revisit some of the recruitments of some of those players. Torrey Davis decommitted. He was one of the top recruits that had been committed to the Bruins, and he put it very bluntly, Huff, and I kind of enjoyed this. No graphic, no notes app, no nothing. It was 3 words in a tweet, and it said recruitment is reopened. I mean, that's a kid who knows what he wants to say.
And to do it when he just scored 8 touchdowns in his most recent game with 2 interceptions.
He's about his business, Huff. He's about his business.
He stands on that business. And I'll tell you what, if coaches want to go click that tape and see what he did in the last game, see what he's done this season, 15 touchdowns on the year, a guy that's the highest rated 3-star in the state of Colorado, potential 4-star after this season, a local product out of Boulder, out of Fairview High School in Boulder. His father played for Colorado, and that's how UCLA was able to get on him. Gabe Lynn, the safeties coach at UCLA, had been recruiting him when he was on staff at Colorado and took him out of Boulder. Well, now with the season he's having, you could see that the market could be expanding for him. And, he's very subtle, very quiet. I went over to Fairview High School last November and spent some time there on campus talking with him, and just a very quiet kid. But like you said, he stands on that business and he's about it. And he is an outstanding football player. And I could see his suitors really kind of grow. Interestingly enough, the other schools that were the finalists for him were the University of Utah, Oklahoma State, which fired their own coach earlier today, and Kansas State. We could see Utah making another run, coming back in. I mean, obviously Utah loves themselves some really good defensive players, especially in the secondary. Kansas State, which has had a little bit of an up and down season themselves. Oklahoma State, which is, a tire fire like UCLA. There could be some more options that he has, or maybe Utah gets right back in there. Their last game against Texas Tech notwithstanding, there's still a program that's trending back in the right direction under Kyle Whittingham.
Huff, you've been doing this a long time. I've been doing this for close to 15 years. And I think when you look at the recruits or the players that handle things a certain way, when you see Torrey Davis just say recruitment is reopening, that's how he decommits and that's how he tells the world that he is open to all the other options. You look at that, and those are the types of players that make it to the NFL. Literally, those are the types of players that just are focused when they get to the college campuses. They're in the facility first. They're the last guy to leave the practice field. They're the ones that are catching the extra 150 balls on the jugs machine. They're the guy that, everyone raves about. They're the guy that goes to the combine and somehow everyone's like, oh, how did this kid, do what he just did? And then that's the player that plays in the NFL for 7-8 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you look at the plus athleticism that he has, the multi-sport aspect that he's got with the track, with the basketball. This is a really good athlete who, was focused on playing all those sports, didn't do a lot of 7-on-7, didn't do a lot of the national camps, but you watch his film and you're like, holy smokes, this guy can absolutely play. And this is, like you said, this is the kind of guy that ends up sneaking into the combine. It's like, we just talked about it. This is the kind of player that Kyle Whittingham has made a killing off of at the University of Utah, the guy that was maybe just a little bit overlooked because he wasn't at one of the big glamorous programs, wasn't at, in front of everybody on social media. He just shut his mouth and played football. Those are the guys that usually have the long-term career that you maybe didn't see coming because they didn't necessarily announce themselves a ton. They just go out, shut up, play football, and are about their business.
Cooper Jaworski is that way as well. He was committed to UCLA, has since reopened things. He's from San Juan Hills High School down in San Juan Capistrano, California. Took an unofficial visit to San Diego State this past weekend, landed the offer from the Aztecs. And how about that environment? How about that atmosphere? I was down there in the Mesa watching San Diego State put up a 0 or hang a 0 against Jaren Keave Sangapolutele and what looked like a really potent Cal offense heading into that matchup. So Jaworski lands that offer from San Diego State. Sounded like he really enjoyed things down there. He's also got an official visit locked in with Auburn for next month. So it does look like UCLA had a potential jewel there in their recruiting class. It's going to be interesting to see what maybe his timeline looks like and whether or not he's accelerated and trying to lock in a spot somewhere or makes a decision early, because I don't know if there was a more vocal player from a recruiting sense that was committed to UCLA, telling other recruits to join him in Westwood, tweeting and putting Instagram posts about how the culture had been changing within the program. It sounded like he was really under the belief that this program was on a turnaround trajectory. And so could he be one of those candidates that if they make a quick hire right after the season, he maybe holds things out and waits and truly wants to be a Bruin and just wants to kind of see what the program is going to look like. So I'm curious to see whether or not Auburn makes that huge push that I think we would expect them to. But if they do, look for the Tigers to potentially be at the forefront of that battle. But I think he's one of those players that with his senior film is going to continue to get more suitors, more programs that look at him because he is one of the best center prospects nationally. And then two others, Huff. We
Hold on.
teased
Did
it
I
at the
mention
top.
that Jackson Arnold got sacked 10 times on Saturday against Oklahoma? Auburn might be trying to talk to Cooper Jaworski into being eligible as soon as next week if he can keep Jackson Arnold upright.
He might be eligible. I mean, he was that impressive throughout the offseason. I think he was maybe the offensive lineman that raised his stock. I don't know if there was anyone that was able to elevate their game or their profile as much as Cooper Jaworski was. He was one of the top performers at the National Preps Showcase down in Southern California. He was one of the top performers at the Under Armour Camp Series stop in Mission Viejo. He was really, really good at the San Juan Hills versus Tustin Showcase that me and Greg Biggins were able to attend back in May. Started to pick up some steam, came off the board to hometown UCLA, which, by the way, had just produced Sean Ryan, who's another San Juan Hills product. So I think that we saw a lot of parallels there. He's tough, he's physical, really athletic, and I think from a leader standpoint is going to be a steal for whatever program ends up landing Cooper Jaworski. Two others, Huff, from that UCLA class that seemed to be trending back to a school that was in contention before those players made their decision to commit to the Bruins. That would be David Schwartzel and Ramzik Fruin, who will be at Montlake this weekend.
Yeah, I think with Washington, for both those, if they push, there's a good chance they end up with both of them. They're the number 2 and 3 players, respectively. Schwartzel, number 2. Ramzak, number 3. Will actually get to go see Schwartzel play on Friday night when O'Day takes on Eastside Catholic. Those two teams are big-time rivals, and Eastside Catholic had O'Day on the ropes, lost to them in the semifinals, and O'Day won the state championship. Partly because of the season that David Schwartzel had. He's actually making some plays as a tight end right now. He said, hey, if you want to list me as an athlete, you can, but make no mistake, he's a defensive lineman, and I think Washington would love to continue to bolster that defensive line and really that front seven. We know the Jedd Fish's offenses are going to be high scoring and dynamic. Their defense is giving up a little bit of points against Colorado State and against Washington State, but with Zadrius Rainey-Saleh, who played with Ramzak last year at Bethel, the number 1 player in the state last year, with Derek Coleman-Brusso already committed right now as the number 1 player. Jedd Fish would love to add number 2 and 3 with Schwartzel and Fruin. With Schwartzel, keep an eye on Stanford. I know they're going through a coaching change of their own, but they are still a factor there. And with Ramzak, BYU, even though he's not LDS, BYU was one of those schools that was, I think they were his first Power 4 offer, and a school that he strongly considered before he committed to UCLA. But if the hometown Huskies want both of them, I think the hometown Huskies get both of them, and they'll have that chance on Saturday to wow them when they play Ohio State.
Again, we are grateful to have the Avery Huffman DIPG Foundation sponsor our episodes. Inspired by Avery's courage, the foundation is dedicated to funding research, bringing hope to families, and working toward a cure for the deadliest childhood brain cancer, DIPG. Learn more and be a part of the fight at averystrongdipg.org. That's averystrongdipg.org, because together we can turn heartbreak into hope. Huff, you're going to be in Seattle. Are you, by any chance, going to be sailgating on Saturday? Are you going to break the news for us?
I will not be sailgating. I will be hanging with a couple of my Canadian friends that are longtime Dogman subscribers. My boys Ryan and Alan. I know Alan listens to this religiously. And big adult refreshment fellas. And guys that I enjoy, and I'll be going to that game as a fan. Will not have to work, so I get to watch. And it might not be sailgating weather, but Blair, coming from Arizona where it's in the 90s, it's gonna be weird to have to put on a hoodie and some sleeves again in September. I know I lived there for a long time, but I'm not prepared to go back to the cold just yet.
I'll be headed to a high school game on Saturday. So you got Bishop Gorman coming back out to Southern California to play Santa Margarita. So that'll be another really interesting matchup between a couple private schools. And I'll be watching that on Saturday. I'm going to a retirement party earlier in the day, but I'll be watching a lot of the action on the phone. I'll look for you. Where are you sitting? Are you sitting behind the end zones like usual?
No, I'll be sitting down in the lower bowl over on the, what would that be? On the Washington side of the field. I'll be enjoying myself. And I will say, Blair, we got a fantastic weekend of college football. We got the whiteout that night, Oregon at Penn State, with some game, that'll have some interest in the Big Ten championship rematch. You've got Alabama and Georgia as well. You've got UCLA and Northwestern in the morning, or in the early afternoon, competing against the Ohio State-Washington game. I imagine there's going to be tens of people tuned in for that one, but a fantastic weekend of college football. You'll be watching Santa Margarita. I might be enjoying myself a margarita. Probably not. But week 5, baby.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. Remember, stay locked in to 247sports.com for all the coverage, all the recruiting information, all the buzz, all the reaction that flows in throughout those game days. You can make sure you check out all that content over on the website. For Brandon Huffman, I am Blair Angulo. Thank you so much for tuning in to this edition of the West of the Rest podcast.